All right, and we're starting to record now as well. And I want to thank all of you for being here this evening. This is a really exciting opportunity to do a different and unusual type of program. And I love seeing all of the audience participation already, and such a wide variety of wonderful hats. And so this is very exciting to see. And so don't be shy. I know we've also seen some people switch out some hats already and everything. And there will be opportunity in a little while as well at the end when we can have some questions and discuss and share and chat and all like that. So my name is Ann Clothier, and I am Director of Education at Brookside Museum, home of the Saratoga County History Center. And this has been an absolutely fascinating opportunity for collaboration this semester with Skidmore College. We are thrilled to see our collection being utilized, and we are just absolutely amazed to see what the students have come up with. And it was really so much fun to go frolicking in the collection, as I say, to go find the hats that the students worked with this semester. And so for this project, we really enjoyed working with Dr. Tillman Nechtman, and you're going to be hearing from him this evening, as well as Dr. Erica Bastress-Dukehart. And I had a really great day in the collections room with them as we went through hats and had all sorts of ooh and ah and oh, did you see this one types of moments, and it was so much fun. The absolute wonderful type of museum day. And so I am so looking forward to seeing what the students came up with and hearing all about it this evening. So if you do have questions as we go along, the presenters have said it's okay to interject if you'd like, but also there will be plenty of opportunity at the end, again, for questions and discussion as well. So I am going to turn it over to the both of them now. I'm going to ask that we all try and keep ourselves on mute if we're not going to be discussing or interjecting anything, just to avoid the random dog barking and doorbell and all like that. And but otherwise, I'm going to turn it over to the professor. So thank you so much for being here.
Take it off mute. I still can't hear them.
Thank you. Thank you, Anne. And on behalf of me and on behalf of Erica, I can't tell everyone what a pleasure this has been for us to be able to do this. This is the second time Erica and I have collaborated as teachers in the classroom in the 16 years that I've been at Skidmore, and the two greatest teaching moments, Erica, have been teaching with you. So thank you for that. And this particular instance, the two of us, we could have taught a class without these hats, and we could have taught a class without this collaboration. But in this particular really challenging, really difficult year, these hats made a huge difference. And so for that, I want everyone in the community to realize and recognize what a great institution the Brookside and the Saratoga County Historical Center is. Michael Landis and Clothier, Field Horn are all on the session with us tonight. We couldn't have done it without the three of you. It was Michael who was here at Skidmore talking about possible collaborations with between the two institutions, who said, we got these hats. We don't know what to do with these hats. And that a tickle started in my head. And that day you spent there letting us, go in and borrow hats. It's a huge act of trust for a museum to let pieces of its collection move from the site to another site. And so to let us take these hats, bring them here, hold them in our locked facilities so that the students could work with them has really been an act of bravery and trust. And I appreciate it because it really has been the key to allowing us to talk with students about material culture and material history. What we'd hope to do tonight, I'm happy to be back. I'm thrilled that you invited me back after my talk on my book last time. What we want to do tonight is much different. We want to talk about the course and about what the students found and what we intend to do with that information. And so Erica was going to begin by telling everyone a bit about the structure of the course and where we went with that. And I will be sharing the screen to give everyone access to a PowerPoint that we have of that. So I'll also point out we do have some students on the call with us. So we will be able to talk to and hear from some students, I hope.
We do indeed. Thanks, Tillman, and welcome everybody. I can't tell you how pleased I am to be here, but more than that, I can't tell you how pleased I am to have had the opportunity to be part of this class. I've been teaching at Skidmore now for almost 20 years, and the collaboration with Tillman this semester, as well as the previous class we did, have been really the highlights for me. And if you ever have an opportunity to come and take a course at Skidmore, to sit in on a class, to just be part of the community, take Tillman's class. Because without question, you will have just a spectacular semester. And it is as much fun to teach with him as it is to learn from him. And so, and I also do indeed want to give a shout out to our students who are here tonight. Thanks for coming, guys. We just had such a great time. I think we told you that 100 times all through the semester. What a great time that we had. So what I want to do is just start out by telling you what we plan to do. And as many of you probably know, plans can go awry when you have 25 students sitting in a room, especially when they're socially distanced and they're wearing masks, and it is a really stressful time. Things don't always go to plan. But what we intended to do at the beginning of this semester, when every student got their hat, we wanted to talk about putting their hats in context. Where did they come from? What families owned them? Why were they given to the museum? And we wanted our students to learn something about the region. Students at Skidmore tend to live in a bubble. They don't often get out to really see beyond Saratoga Springs. And these hats gave them, they were almost a map that offered them the opportunity to get out beyond Saratoga Springs. And they were just joyfully celebrating areas that they didn't know existed. They went to Rotterdam and Amsterdam. They learned about Galway. They learned a lot about Boston Spa. And they came back just really appreciating who we are as a community in upstate New York. And to us, that we walked away thinking that was just really an exciting part of this course. We also hope to have a conversation about hats in literature. And so we put into our syllabus, we started with children's literature. And so we read The Cat in the Hat. How many of you have read Cat in the Hat in the last, say, 10 years? Yeah, well, we hadn't either. It's a little bit of a shock to go back and read a story about a kid who's been left alone at home all day and lets a stranger into his house. And then havoc ensues. And we had conversations about changing expectations and mores. We read pieces from Alice in Wonderland. Of course, you can't walk away without talking about the Mad Hatter. But we also looked at other books, children's books in particular, about hats as magical moments. And that was really important to us to get a sense of how hats have played a role in us growing up. And so we had those conversations. But we also talked about what we wanted to talk about was manufacturing, effects on the environment, and about our hats and their personal histories. So these were all our plans that we expected to have unfold. Most important for us, this course was really about microhistories, and that is talking about small topics that have really big stories. And starting with a single hat is one story, but what this hat represents, as far as, for example, mine and Tillman's, they're Stetsons. They represent something about the West, something about the American spirit, and other things that we didn't even know existed. And we wanted to incorporate these microhistories and teach our students what a microhistory is and how to become a historian and how to tell stories. And we were really lucky. When we created this course, we thought it was just going to be the two of us at the front of the room. And it turns out that we have colleagues who are really excited about hats and about what hats can tell us about the human experience. And so we had we had 3 faculty and, well, actually we had 2 faculty members and three of our colleagues who invited themselves to our class, which surprised us because that never happens, in order to share their expertise. And so I just want to walk through very quickly. A couple of them are here tonight with us, and I, again, really appreciate you being here. We started out on talking about hats in Tibet. We have a colleague who teaches in Asian studies. He contacted us. He said he was really excited about this conversation, and he wanted to talk about Tibet. He wanted to talk about religious symbols, and especially about the hat as a symbol of Tibetan life. And so he came and just did this spectacular presentation on hats and a part of the world that I don't think our students knew much about. Then we had a presentation by Alex Thomas, who taught at Skidmore last year, and she came and did just this splendid presentation on hats in early modern Europe, from religious headwear to witches' hats to everything in between, how the Renaissance represents the human head and headwear. And it was a great moment for our students to understand the history of the hats in European history. And then Rothwell, and I should note that Alex is a graduate of Skidmore, as is Rothwell, who worked at Mount Vernon, and she's now a graduate student at Duke. She's working on textiles and material culture. And she did not talk about hats, but she talked about the materiality of hats. She talked about the manufacture of materials, she started with just talking about calico. And she took that from the 18th through the 20th century. The image I have here is of Anne von Rensler in her 18th century gown. And Roz knows every detail about the material culture of these dresses. And she taught our students how to think about their hats, not as headwear, but as materials, as the pieces that create the hat. So she talked about the meaning of the hat as being something very different than what we had thought about. I have Keep It Chic here, which is edited by Preston Davis, who is also here tonight. Preston was a editor at Vogue magazine for 20 years before she started writing her blog, Keep It Chic. And she came and talked about the world in modern fashion and hats in the modern world. And she gave our students a really different perspective about how hats went out of style, how hats have come back into style, and what that means for fashion, what that means for us, and how we think about fashioning ourselves. And I also, full disclosure here, Preston is my sister. I was incredibly proud to have her come and be part of this class. And I have to say that our students turned around and contacted her when they started their projects to ask her about how to think about fashion and describing their hat. And finally, at the end of the semester, Professor Dan Nathan in American Studies, another professor, if you ever have an opportunity to take a class at Skidmore, please take a class with Dan. He came and talked about baseball caps, which you would think would not take up more than 3 seconds. And in fact, Dan could have talked for at least 4 classes about the significance and the meaning of sports and headwear, but in particular the baseball cap. And our students were mesmerized. We were mesmerized. And the lovely thing, of course, we were all wearing our various baseball caps. And it was really a nice moment to bring popular culture and how we think about popular culture and that ubiquitous baseball cap as our moment. So that's what we intended to do this semester. What we ended up doing, Tillman will talk about, which was really something, a combination of many things. But just the end of my little part here, our instructions to our students were very simple. We asked them to research and present a biography of their hat. Each one of them was given a hat from the museum, and they then had to really dig in and decide what it is that they wanted to talk about that particular hat. Some of them came to us and said, I can't find anything. And our response was pretty simple. If you can't find the information that you're looking for, you have to ask a different question. And they did. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Tillman.
Thanks, Erica. And I will say you should also take Erica's classes. You should take them before mine. Yeah, so there was a real sense here that the students were given a hat and asked to write what we called a biography of it. On day one, they walked into our auditorium and there were boxes on the seats, and each student sat down in a let's make a deal sort of fashion and opened their box and was introduced to the hat that they were going to be working with. And as many people had said to me, and when I first approached Erica about this, I think, Erica, you stared at me a little bit too, wondering like, what exactly were we going to get from this? There's an old expression that something is all hat and no cattle, and to suggest that the cowboy wearing the hat, but he doesn't have the cows to go with the identity. Was this class going to get us anywhere? And as Erica said, I think it did. And what I want to do is give you a couple of hats. And for the students who are here, I apologize if you don't see your hat. It is in no way a reflection of the grades you're about to receive once those go live. It's simply we had to make some selections, and I'm walking through some of these. But we wanted to give you a sense of some of the hats that we saw. The oldest hat in the collection was one that came off of a shelf. Erica and I saw it when we were in the museum with Anne. It was wrapped in what looked to be a dry cleaner's bag, sealed with duct tape. Anne had told us, let's don't open it here. You can open it once or twice, maybe when you get it to campus and work with it. But it was too captivating. Lying flat, you could tell it was a very, very old bicorn. And so this hat went to a student by the name of Grace, who I'm going to give you just some quick information, and we can begin to unpack what this means. And Erica, feel free to jump in at any point. Oh. This hat dates to 1826. So it dates to the year of the 50th anniversary of the signing of the US Declaration of Independence. The hat is black beaver. It's a bicorn, obviously. It's trimmed with gold braided, what you see on this side, this wire that's been made into a gold braid. It has a gold eagle up at the top in the middle of that bow. And the bow, if you fold it back ever so slightly on the inside, is embroidered with the names of Washington and Lafayette. And what Grace was able to discover was that in 1826, General Lafayette returned. Many of the founding figures in the revolution had begun to die out, and Lafayette went on a long tour of America. And in various places, there were parades and special paraphernalia made. So what we're looking at here is effectively a souvenir of the 50th birthday party for the United States of America. It was found in 1888, or it was found in the attic of a house that was built in 1888, and has been now at the museum ever since it was donated. So this gives you a sense of the kind of depth of history that we were looking at. History that is at once local, because we know that Lafayette came through our region. We know that there were parades in our region, and we have every reason to suspect this hat was probably worn in one of those contexts, but that's also national and global, remembering that Lafayette returned for that 50th anniversary birthday party of the nation all the way from France. The second hat I want us to look at is a set of hats, actually. Here we have a picture of the Ballston Spa Fire Department Eagle Matt Lee #1 house. This is the firefighters in their dress uniforms. This hat went to a student by the name of Maddie. Now Maddie's hat, she knows, is not one of the ones pictured in this picture, because the one she's had was made with some synthetic materials that would not have dated to the age of this picture. But what she did was went back to the records and discovered that a fellow by the name of Louis Schumacher donated this hat to the Brookside, to the History Center. And so she began digging around in records and was able to discover that Mr. Schumacher was born on August 18th of 1928 and lived until 2016, when he died at the age of 87. He was a member of the firefighting force there in Ballston Spa from 1962 for 53 years. She was able to tell us that he was a woodworker, one of a dozen men who started the Schenectady Volunteer Ambulance Service, a a Korean War vet, that he had been educated at the Scotia Glenville High School and at Siena College. And in a moment that touched our heartstrings, she was able to give us this, a picture she found of Mr. Schumacher wearing the very hat that he donated to the museum. So when we talk about giving these hats a biography, we really are talking about, as Erica pointed out, students who are having to walk around our community in ways they've never before. Where is Scotia? Where is Glenville? Where is Ballston Spa? But also having to connect with the local population, having to connect with people like Mr. Schumacher, whom Maddie in her presentation referred to as Mr. Schumacher every single time. I have a note from her presentation. A real heartfelt sense that this was, that she had met someone from the community and come to understand a bit more about our region and about the people who've lived here and been the beating heart of our communities.
She did, and can I just step in?
Go ahead, yeah.
She had a conversation with Mr. Schumacher's widow, and it was really a moment for her. We have, our students are in their 20s, and they rarely get to reach out to people in the community, especially people with these kinds of stories. And she came into her presentation really moved by the conversation that she'd had with Mrs. Schumacher about her husband, about their lives together, and about this particular hat. It was a connection that just wouldn't have happened without this class.
And in an interesting interaction between the student, that conversation, and the record of the museum, the family didn't believe that Mr. Schumacher had donated the hat. They had no memory of him doing it. The record, though, and thank you, Field, for finding this for us, indicates that Mr. Schumacher himself signed the deed of gift to the museum and gave the hat to the museum in honor of deceased firefighters. So she was able to give information back to the family about this man, their father, their husband, and the hat in subsequent conversations. So there really was, I think, an interaction. In some ways, this hat came back to life for Maddie and for us and for the family. Speaking of coming back to life, there were 5 hats. Now, Anne and Erica and I went into that room at the Brookside that day, and Erica and I just picked the hats that were the prettiest. There was a certain raw tackiness about it, as we just went, ooh, that one's got to go. We did not expect at the time, nor could we have imagined, that by sheer luck, 5 of the hats would have belonged to the same family. And 5 of these hats, therefore, were reunited in the course of this. They were hats, quote, from the same closet. They were Eugenia Cook's hats. And I have here a picture. This woman in the center, and Chris, you can tell me, and Alicia, you can tell me if I'm wrong. That's Eugenia right there. Am I right?
Yes, that's correct.
Both of the students who are here tonight had, or the 2 that I've seen, had hats from Eugenia. Chris, I don't have yours photographed. I apologize. Eugenia was from Galway. I taught school in Amsterdam. This is Eugenia's mother here. Eugenia was the treasurer for the Galway Women's Christian Temperance Union, was an active member in that chapter of the WCTU. The students were able to interview friends. They worked together collaboratively. These hats had come from the same closet. They had to be dealt with as a collection. And friends to a person told us that Mrs. Cook was frugal. She liked to save money. She liked to reuse things. Chris, actually, I'll share the story that he found for us. Mrs. Cook once was asked to go for a friend to the grocery store and buy a week's worth of dog food. And Eugenia famously asked, what if the dog dies between now and the end of the week? That's how she saw money and frugality. And so what we discovered, though, as we started looking at these hats, this is a hat that you may have noticed over my shoulder here in my office. These don't look like the hats of a frugal, modest, sort of quiet woman from Galway. That hat, to me, Erica and I, when we saw it, called it the Three Musketeers hat. This is swashbuckling and daring, if you ask me. This hat actually was purchased. Eugenia, we know, purchased most of her hats somewhere, some of them either in Amsterdam, some of them in Schenectady. She seems to have shopped in both directions from Galway. That too was something the students learned. They had to place Little Galway on the maps of their local community and begin to pace out what it would have looked like to shop for hats in either Amsterdam or Schenectady. So this hat was one that was purchased in Schenectady. Chris, who is here with us, had a hat that was purchased in, this hat was purchased in Amsterdam. Chris, your hat was purchased in Schenectady.
Yes, in Schenectady.
And Alicia, you're here with us tonight. This is Alicia's hat, which is a high-crowned hat with silk flowers on the inside and a horsehair braided web across the top of it. Again, a very elaborate hat for a supposedly frugal woman. And in an interesting twist, Alicia was able to find, because this hat on the interior tells us that it was made by Alfred Wolfson of New York, was able to find a great deal of information about Alfred Wolfson, the store at 28 to 30 West 38th Street in New York City, including the ad that you see here that tells us there's value in every hat. The building on the right, Alicia, you can attest to this, I stole straight from your presentation. That's the building that the hat was originally sold in, and is still a hat. There's still, is it, Alicia, is it a hat shop?
Yes.
So it is still vending hats even down to the present. So Mrs. Cook, were she still with us, could still head into New York City on that rare frugal shopping trip and get herself another pretty piece of headwear. Another piece from that collection was this hat. This is listed in the catalog at the museum as a brimless woman's hat, top covered with ruched brown silk velvet, edges covered with pheasant feathers and down, light brown velvet bow at the back. And this is one of those moments that Erica and I think many historians could talk to you about, where you start to look at the historical records of what's in a museum and in an archive, and you start to wonder if you're not sure that your analysis doesn't lead you to challenge it. Hannah, the student who had this hat, looked at this and she said, I don't think those are pheasant feathers. She really began to tussle and go through other natural history catalogs. And you know, the temptation, I think, for an undergraduate student would be to approach this hat in hand, pun intended, and say, you know, this is, the record has to be right. Hannah didn't. Hannah said, nope, I've done some study. These are turkey feathers. Turkey feathers would have been appropriate for the period the hat was made. And so she began to ask questions about what is in this hat. And she said to us in our offices that she started thinking about those cooking shows where they deconstruct the sandwich and give you the bread with the pieces on the side. So what I'd like to share with you next is a graphic that Hannah created, made herself, of this hat and the various pieces that go into it deconstructed. This is what she created. So there is the turkey from which the feathers come, the cotton from which the bow has been made, some flax that appears in some of the stitching in the hat, and here is the chrysalis of a silkworm, because the silk would have been in that ruched silk at the top. So what you see here is that hat in the student's imagined deconstructed form. Now, Chris and Alicia are both here with us, and they both could tell us the stories about that frugality. The question then is, what did Eugenia pay for this hat? But Hannah decided to ask that question not so much in the economic sense, but in the natural history sense. And this was something Erica and I took very seriously in this course. Some of the hats that we were looking at had feathers in them that would be illegal if you were to put them in a hat today. And so we spent a lot of time thinking about the natural world and what was used out of the natural world to go into these hats. So Hannah went so far as to tell us that her estimate was that in that hat, there were probably 50 bowls of cotton needed to make some of the material that was there, which is about half of the production of a cotton plant. She estimated that the number of feathers on there is probably about what one turkey could supply in its hat. She estimated that it probably, to make all of that ruched silk, about 100 silk moths to produce that. And in order to feed 100 silk moths, you probably need the production capacity of one full mulberry tree. So she begins to give us here a natural cost of what it took for the ever so prudent Mrs. Cook to wear this one brown silk ruched hat with, and we'll, you know, the debatable, probable turkey feathers on top. So this is the sense of the local history that Erica talked to you about. As Erica said, many of the students came back to us and said, I'm not finding it. I don't know who these people are. I don't have enough information. One of them was a student by the name of Ella. who had this hat. And Ella came back and said, there's not a whole lot going on here, but if we flipped this over on the inside, this hat is identified as a Sharon Originals. And so Ella began what she considered a detective search, a mystery search around the world to find out, where is Sharon as a hat company? What are they doing? Where are they? What's going on there? And what popped up when she did was a National Labor Relations Board lawsuit against the Sharon Hat Corporation from 1961, a case in which the workers at the Sharon Hat factory were discontent with the kind of labor relations that they had with their employer and sued them. So though we have this lovely hat, and Ella on eBay was able to find a number of lovely hats made by Sharon Original, you're not going to find Sharon Originals being produced anymore. This company that was not good to its workers is now out of business. When Ella put up a display in the hallway here in the history department, one of our colleagues, Jennifer Delton, who does modern American business history, came to my office basically screaming, going, oh my gosh, that's a really important labor relation case. It's one that's taught in law school classes all the time. And it's one that Ella would never have encountered. It's one of the myriad ways that, as Preston said, when she came to the class, you put the hat on and you step up into the hat. You step up into the hat's history and its story as well. And so when Ella put this hat on, metaphorically, she stepped up into that history and that story and brought to us a national history of labor and relations. All right, Erica, does that capture that portion?
Well, that's great. I guess I just would follow up a little bit and just say that one of the things that we really did emphasize was the environmental impact that hats have. And from them being beaver pelts to the feathers that are used, they've had a huge environmental impact. And it's something that still lingers, and it's something that we just really need to think about. And that was a conversation that we had all the way through the course.
And I mean, that's just an example or a sample of this course. We had 26 students when we started. We have 31 hats from the museum here on campus presently that we were able to sort of work with. So this is not but a small sample to give you a sense of how these, what I've considered our thinking caps all semester, have helped us move through our work on this. But not every hat had a history or a local story that could be told. And as Erica said, we asked the students to go back to the drawing board, think of new questions. There will be later in June an exhibit opening at the History Center there at the Brookside with these hats and the student labels. And it will emphasize in that form the local history, where these hats come from. I imagine and I hope that the Eugenia Cook hats will be displayed side by side proudly again. The exhibit will then at some point in the fall move over here to Skidmore to the Tang, which those of you local will know is a more, let's go with avant-garde institution. And there we're able to take some of the broadly liberal arts educational work that students here at Skidmore do. And that's what some of the students were able to do who couldn't find as much about their hats. We had three in particular that I want to highlight today because they're all of the same hat genre. They're all funeral bonnets, all worn by different people at a time of loss, at a time of mourning. And of course, Erica and I were very aware that we were teaching in the pandemic. We taught on campus, but it was not by any stretch of the imagination an easy semester for students to be here. Our students and those who are on this call with us should clap for those who are here with us and the students, because they survived moments where they had to pick up their food from the dining hall in bags because they couldn't go anywhere. You all are magnificent, and we thank you for what you endured this semester. And these three had funeral hats at a moment of loss, at a moment of death, at a moment of illness, and they didn't have as much information about them. And so they had to go back to the liberal arts core of their education and deal with their hats in those sorts of ways. This is a picture that a student by the name of Mary Drew made herself. It is a self-portrait. Mary Drew had a hat from 1880 to 1895. It was a flat black velvet bonnet covered with dead grass, some artificial pink flowers, and black glass seed bead twigs. But she didn't know much beyond that. And the information in the museum didn't lead to leads that let her do much with it. So she sat as an artist and said to herself, I wonder what it felt like to wear this. I wonder what the emotions felt like when you sat under this and wept for someone you had lost. And so this is the picture of herself dealing with those questions and dealing with those emotions. The picture is here in my office. It's enormous. And so I really do imagine it becoming a central piece of the exhibit when it comes here to the Tang, and perhaps a postcard or something of that sort, because it really is a beautiful piece of art that I think gets to the way empathy and art worked for Mary Drew and her research and her thinking about this hat. We had another student, Justin, who had a hat from a woman by the name of Kathleen Knickerbocker. It's a bonnet made of black straw with black silk ribbons. There's a black net ruched inside the brim, and there are some fairly low-grade black flowers, colorful artificial flowers on the hat. The hat is dated from 1880 to 1895, and as I said, it belonged to a woman by the name of Kathleen Knickerbocker. Thanks to Field, Justin was able to discern that Kathleen Knickerbocker was born to a farming family in West Charlton. Justin went out to West Charlton, he drove around, he got a real sense of where Kathleen was born, and on the way back in, he stopped in Ballston Spa, where Kathleen died as the richest woman in Ballston Spa, or one of the wealthiest women in Ballston Spa, having married into money. And so he struggled thinking about, why did this woman of means at the end of her life still have this bonnet that was from the earlier portion of her life? And what did this bonnet mean to her, that it was something obviously not as nice as some of what she was able to purchase? What did it mean, and what did it why did it travel with her there to the very end? Justin took his first year seminar with me here at Skidmore years back, and has been a beautiful writer ever since. So Justin decided to embody the hat and embody Mrs. Knickerbocker and write a letter as Mrs. Knickerbocker to her dead husband, imagining what it felt like to encounter this hat in the closet at the time that Mrs. Knickerbocker was mourning. And since he imagined, given the date, that the hat had probably belonged to Mrs. Knickerbocker's mother, he imagines that it was a hat her mother, a poor farming woman from West Charlton, wore at her husband's funeral. And with Justin's permission, I'm going to read you 2 paragraphs from that letter. He actually tied this bonnet on his head, and you didn't hear me say that, and sat in front of the room and read this to us. Before the funeral, I stood resolutely in front of my closet, mute with the pressure of choosing which black dress would be the most suited to the occasion. I trailed my fingers over luxurious satins and silks. A woman can never be without her fine clothing, especially on a day when all eyes will be on her. I made my decision, choosing an austere dress of black velvet, and sought next for an appropriate hat, something dark and wide, and perhaps feathered. As I quested upward with my hands, a hat fell to the floor with a distinct crunching sound. It was the grotesque bonnet my mother wore to my father's funeral, what felt like a lifetime ago. I picked up the detestable thing and looked at it closer. The workmanship was embarrassing. It looked as if it could fall apart at any moment. The materials were cheap and poorly attached. I could not help but grimace when I looked at the tears in the ribbon, the tears in the ribbon, and the sheer ugliness of the flowery decoration. I hadn't seen the bonnet worn in polite company in decades, not even in this century perhaps, and I especially had not seen a hat of such poor quality worn by a woman in church. I certainly wouldn't be caught dead wearing the thing myself. But with not a soul around to see me, something possessed me to try on the awful thing. I lifted it carefully to my head, and tying the ribbons beneath my chin, I was transported into a different time and place. Looking in the mirror, I saw not myself, but my mother, wearing the very same bonnet, racked with sobs for the dutiful husband she had lost. It was then that I let fall the only tears I cried after your death, Jack, but they were not for you. They were for the woman I might have been, for the life I might have had we not wed. So that's the powerful part, or part of the powerful letter that Justin wrote, to be the kind of words that this hat might have spoken. And with that in mind, Erica and I both agreed we wanted to end with a presentation that actually left, I think, just about everyone in the room in tears, which was another funeral bonnet dating from 1885 to 1895. A black bonnet with standing brim, covered with ruched and pleated black silk velvet and heavy black sequins all around it. The bonnet was made in Paris, so it belongs to a wealthier person, to be sure. And the student who had it, Zach, also had a hard time finding the hat, but was himself a music scholar here at Skidmore. So he began to ask questions about what sorts of music, what sorts of sounds attended to a funeral in the late 1880s and early 1890s, and therefore asked the very pointed question, what would my hat have heard? And when he found a funeral elegy that in the 1890s, he decided that his project would be to play that for us. He's a cellist by discipline. So he would play that elegy for us. And as he sat in front of the class playing this, dressed in black himself, with the hat sitting on a mannequin on a table in front of him, we all listened in absolute rapture. Erica and I both, for the first time in our lives, crying in a classroom, because this was the sounds that he felt his hat might have heard at the funerals that it was worn to. And that's the sound that Zach's hat might have heard. And so with that, I think what Erica and I can conclude with is saying that we've discovered hats are local, they're national, they're global, sometimes they're legal, sometimes they're industrially made, sometimes they're natural, handmade, sometimes they're made out of artificial things, sometimes they're made out of the natural world. They're lyric, they're poetic, they're romantic, occasionally they're heartbreaking, sometimes they're musical, sometimes they're creative, but they're always historical. Mm-hmm. And thanks to the Brookside, I think we've discovered they have a story to tell. And it's been our pleasure, in conjunction with some terrific students who have endured a lot, to help these hats tell their story. And we look forward to continuing to let them tell their story at the Saratoga County Historical Center and at Skidmore at the Tang later this year. Thank you all. And with that, if anyone has questions, Erica and I are happy. And I'm going to go ahead and invite the students. I'm going to put you on the spot. They'll take questions too.
Absolutely. Tillman, can we go back to all of us?
Yes, I'll stop the share, and there we all are again. Welcome back.
Excellent. Thank you. Hi, Chris.
Oh, Chloe's here too. Hi, Chloe. Sorry, I didn't see you before I shared the screen.
Excellent. We are happy to answer questions, comments, thoughts.
I have a question.
Oh, hi, Claudia.
The first hat, the Lafayette,
Yes.
is that a woman's hat or a man's hat?
We do not know. I think the student assumed the whole way through it was a man's hat, given the military nature and the parade nature of it. The
But
record,
it also had a bow.
again, not unusual for a military hat to have a bow on it, a sort of large parade bow in the late 18th century, early 19th century. Yeah. There are men and women associated with the history of the hat, though, having been left in an attic. So in the record, the student did go through looking at men and women in the family, trying to figure out when, where, why was it found in the attic, who might have owned it, what family might have owned it to have put it up in that attic before it came to the center.
And also at that era, it might have been referred to more of as a cockade, yes, rather than a bow, which would have been a typical way of decorating a men's military or ceremonial hat. And you do see bows and cockades and things like that, even in men's formal and military clothing at that time.
As Erica and I have on the syllabus, one of the questions we asked students early on, it was, after all, Yankee Doodle who stuck a feather in his hat and called it macaroni. So.
Right. Right about that time. So
I wanted to take a minute. This is Arlene Rhodes. I wanted to take a minute to just tell you, Erica and Tillman, that your students conducted themselves in such a nice manner. I had a video conference with Isabel and Chris and anyway, the Eugene U. Cook hats.
Yep.
And they were so interested and asked such wonderful questions. And, it's a credit to you folks to represent your class. It was a delightful experience for me to chat with them.
Well, let me turn that around. And I didn't catch your name.
Arlene Rhodes.
Hi, Arlene. Let me turn it around. First of all, our students really are truly wonderful. But we couldn't have done this without you and with others in the community who were willing to share comments, thoughts, histories of their families. And so let us thank you also. This was a real leap of faith for all of us, and especially for our students. They are not used to reaching out like that to people they don't know. And so you made this possible. And we really, one of the reasons we wanted to do this tonight was really to thank the people who were part of this class, even though you weren't sitting masked with us, distanced. So thank you.
Well, it was a lot of fun.
Good. Excellent. Any other comments?
I'm just wondering, will you be offering this class again?
Erica, do you want to take that one?
We have, let me tell you sort of the process. And by the way, I'm loving your bonnet. I was noticing the fascinator earlier, but your bonnet is just wonderful.
That's from like the 1800s as well.
You should be on a prairie somewhere. We taught a course before called Sea Tales that was also about microhistories, and we sort of taught the same kind of thing through looking at the history of the oceans. We taught this course, hats, microhistories, using hats as that vehicle. We've toyed with what we want to do next, and we've come up with, we're going to teach a course called Animal Tales, and we're going to talk about just the history of human interaction with animals and the natural history. It's something both Tillman and I are really interested in, and there's great microhistory. So if you want to come sit in with us, we would love it. We are just really super excited about it.
Can I say something?
Yes, I'm liking the new hat, Joe Ellen.
Yeah, this is one actually that I used a foundation and then made this because it's actually I was doing something on a woman from the 1850s and I found a picture of a hat similar to this, so I made it up. But what I wanted to say is I think this is absolutely a fabulous course. I graduated from Skidmore in '69 and we had no courses anything like this. So you might see me auditing sometime because these sound like very, very exciting courses. And I am extremely impressed with how your students went and developed the way they were going to report on these. They didn't just do reports, they used their talents. And I think that that is just wonderful.
It's an interesting, I didn't mean to interrupt. First of all, we would love to have you come to our classes, either when we teach together or when we teach separately. We would love that. We welcome folks in our classes. It gives our students such nice perspective beyond the walls of Skidmore. But you know, it was such a joy to do this and to bring the community in and our students to the community.
And by giving the students the hats, we really, I feel, empowered them to think like historians in a way, you know, to take a very small, finite topic. So often when you say to a student, I want you to write a research paper, they will come back and say something like, I'm going to write a new biography of Napoleon. And you might ask them, are you going to France, to the archives? Do you speak French? And they say no to both questions, which means they are not going to write a new biography of Napoleon. But with this hat, they started with this notion that these were too small. There was no history to be had here. And I haven't mentioned Chloe, who I didn't see earlier, but Chloe's here. Chloe, you know, in her report has pictures of the house where the hat lived, and was able to interact with the family that the hat was part of, was able to build a photo album effectively for a family. And so in that regard, the project becomes big in its scope compared to the hat that it started with. But the questions, the historians' questions, as Erica pointed out earlier, that's really what we taught, was how to ask the historians questions. So it's still a history class, but it's about turning over a primary piece of material, archival matter that you found. How do you dig the history out of this? And I in some ways I feel, Erica, like we might have tricked them into doing history by telling them we were going to teach them the history of hats, because we gave them the things, and the history was magically appeared out of it for them when they started to tug.
Mhm.
I have a couple questions.
Go ahead.
I'm very curious. I put it in the chat room, but I'll bring it up again. I'm curious as to how the students reacted to what they saw with the old hats versus hats today, and something that would be a real obvious point would be the Saratoga hats at the racetrack.
Mhm.
And at the same time, the change in baseball hats from that nice baseball hat that had a nice slim brow to this wide brow that people wear forwards and backwards. I'm curious if those things came up in your conversations with students.
Students, anybody want to chime in on this one? Yeah,
Go
go,
ahead,
Chloe.
Well, I definitely will say we did discuss the different like shapes of the baseball cap. When oh my gosh, I'm forgetting his name, the American Studies professor.
And Nathan.
Professor Nathan, when Professor Nathan came in, he brought in a bunch of baseball caps from his own life. And you could see, I talked to him about this after class, you could see how the brim like changed shape. And I thought that that was super interesting because my hat specifically was a hat that was very modern and that represented like a modern woman. It's a cloche style hat. So to see the baseball cap like change shape based on like the modernness of it was super interesting to me. And also to like look around the room. I said this on the last day. Chris, who's another student here, who's here today, he's wearing the fabulous bowler. I said this at the last day. Chris wears hats like that around school, and like how amazing that is and super cool. And now it's more commonplace for people not to wear hats. And if you wear a hat, you stand out. And it's interesting to see through history how it's changed from if you didn't wear a hat, that meant you weren't high in social ranking and that there was something wrong with you. It wasn't that you just weren't wearing one, it was that you were missing one. And now Chris walks around with a bowler and he stands out because of that. But it's really interesting, if you put him back 100 years, he wouldn't. It's super, super cool to see how hat styles and hat shapes have changed and what they represent to the community and to the society that we're part of. It's amazing.
And John, we talked a lot about how the meaning of the baseball cap has changed over time. And with all the messaging that goes on a cap now, it's more about partisanship and the message in some ways than it is about the cap itself. We also discovered that our students can walk into the classroom wearing a baseball cap backwards, but Tillman and I tried it once and decided that was never going to happen again. So it's also a generational thing.
Yeah, and we talked some about about how not only class but race influences what happens when a person puts a different hat on. Thanks to Preston, we were able to talk about not only the ruptures but also the continuities in fashion with hats. We have in this collection a hat that will be on display. It's a seal fur pillbox hat dated from 1900 to 1910. And interestingly enough, the pillbox, if you look at the history of fashion, supposedly emerges in the 1930s and is of course famously made popular by Jackie Kennedy. with the wonderful blue pillbox that she wears at the inauguration and accidentally crushes when the wind blows it off, and then the now lost pink one that she wore the day of the Kennedy assassination. This is a hat that according to fashion predates the pillbox as a big fashion hat by about 20 years. But the continuity of that, because we did spend some time looking, we had a student from London who created a Gossip Girl account of hats that went into a deep dive into the royal family's fascination with fascinators and pillbox hats that look a great deal like they did in the 1950s, the 1960s, and even the 19-teens before they were ostensibly invented. So there's a continuity there as well that we were able to find.
How about the one last question? How about the racetrack hats?
Our students aren't here in the summer. It took us a little bit to convince them that that is actually a huge event, and that we are part of it. We should be, what is it, horses history and you know, and it should be hats too. But our students didn't quite catch on to that because they go home before that happens.
And the closest they perhaps came to it was a couple of the hats were actually purchased from hat stores in Saratoga. One in particular I'm thinking of that just doesn't exist anymore. And that to them was a strange reality, that they connected that to a moment when everyone wore hats, not necessarily to a moment when, to Saratoga's cultural moment of racetrack and hats.
Right. Susan, you've been trying.
Yes. Hi. I'm Susan Krula. Like Joe Ellen, I'm a Skidmore alumnus, class of 1977. I'm wearing a 19th century hat, which is today illegal. I have a collection from my grandmother from the 20s through the 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And as a musician, the hats become the character. So I have done whole concerts with just hats, and each hat becomes the character that I sing about. So the music is paired with the hat for that period and for that time. And I would love for you guys to see a collaboration with the music department sometime. I think it's so much fun, and everybody loves to see the character change. And I just have to say this, I was so excited that you did this program, because I've been wearing hats my whole life. But I have a collection, and just recently in Saratoga, SPAC did our flower show, and we all wore our hats.
I love
and
it.
People really noticed, and people really said, wow, you know, people really thought it was very festive, and it became a mood, and it just changes things when people are dressed up and you're wearing the different hats. So thank you so much. I think this is wonderful.
Well, we love it. Your hat, I'm assuming, is illegal because of the feathers?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. As you can see, now this is from Utica, New York, at an antique store. And you can see it, I'll hold it up. It's quite elaborate.
It certainly
And this is the kind of hat that would be worn at Saratoga during the 1890s. But I chose this hat because I was singing from La Boheme, and this was Mimi's aria. So this was her hat.
Okay, Field and Ann, you got to get Susan's address and start cultivating her.
Start working on her hats.
Beautiful. On museum acquisitions.
Okay. Well, I think we've used up our time tonight, and then some.
All right, I've just checked the chat, and it looks like, again, some great support for the class and the program, and very grateful that everyone seems to have had a good time. And again, do remember to come and check out the exhibit when it opens. A couple of quick reminders about some things coming up. We are going to be having a chicken barbecue on June 4th. and also a craft fair on June 5th. At the end of June, we will be reopening with more exhibits, and also planning a mini Sheep to Shawl Family Day event for the last Sunday in the month. And we are really looking forward to welcoming everyone, the community back, and having some really great content and exhibits for everyone to see. So if anyone has any questions or anything we can help with, certainly reach out to us at Brookside and the Saratoga County History Center. And but we will also be having next month, if you enjoy our Experts Next Door series, we are going to be hearing from the New York Joseph Smith and the Fight for Religious Freedom with Dr. Spencer McBride. And so we encourage you to sign up for that Experts Next Door series as well. So again, thank you for being here. Thank you for continuing to support the museum. If you're not yet a member, consider checking out that section of our website as well. But again, thank you so much for being here this evening. And thank you so much to the professors who led up the program this evening. So thank you very, very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good night.